Right now, somewhere in the world, a dog is sleeping beside a human. Maybe it is under a table. Maybe it is at the foot of the bed. Maybe it is waiting near a door for someone it loves to come home. We see that image so often that we almost stop noticing how strange it really is. A large carnivorous animal, descended from wolves, one of the most efficient predators in natural history, has become the creature that watches over children, comforts the lonely, guards a house, and somehow knows when you are sad before you say a single word. That should not feel normal. It should feel almost impossible. Because the dog is not just another animal we happen to live with. The dog is a biological mystery hidden inside everyday life. It shares almost all of its DNA with the wolf. And yet one became the symbol of the wild, while the other became the symbol of loyalty. One can still live by killing what it hunts. The other can stare into a human face with an expression so familiar that people swear it understands every emotion passing through their mind. So the question is not only how dogs were domesticated. The deeper question is why this creature exists at all in the form we know it today. Most people think the answer is obvious. Humans needed help with hunting, guarding, or herding, so they tamed wolves and gradually turned them into dogs. That explanation sounds clean and satisfying, but reality is much stranger than that. The dog was not created in a single act of human control. It was not simply designed like a tool. It emerged from one of the most unusual relationships ever formed between two species. And what came out of that relationship changed human history. Without dogs, humans would still exist, but not as the same civilization, not with the same emotional life, and maybe not with the same speed of survival and expansion across the planet. And here's what makes this story so fascinating. Scientists still argue over the details. They disagree about where dogs first emerged, when exactly the process began, and whether humans led it or whether wolves began it themselves. That uncertainty is not a weakness in the story. It is what makes it so alive. Because buried inside this familiar animal is one of the oldest unanswered questions in the history of our species. Why did a wolf approach the fire, and why did a human allow it to stay? By the end of this script, the dog will no longer feel like a normal household animal. It will feel like what it really is. One of evolution's most astonishing experiments, one of humanity's oldest allies, and perhaps the closest thing nature has ever produced to a friendship between species. To understand why dogs exist, we have to go back far beyond cities, beyond farming, beyond written language, into a world where survival was uncertain every single day. Early humans lived in small groups, hunted dangerous prey, competed with other predators, and slept in a landscape where the night itself was a threat. Somewhere in that world, a wolf came close to a human campfire. That moment, simple as it sounds, may have changed everything. The old popular idea was that humans capture wolf pups, raise them, and over generations transformed them into dogs. There may have been some truth to that in later stages, but many scientists now believe the beginning was more subtle and more accidental. The wolves that first entered the path toward becoming dogs may not have been captured at all. They may have been the less fearful wolves, the ones bold enough to come near human camps to scavenge bones, scraps, discarded meat, and waste. Human settlements, even primitive ones, produce leftovers. For a wild animal, that was an opportunity. For humans, those wolves may have been annoying, useful, or simply tolerated as long as they were not too aggressive. This matters because it means the first step in the creation of the dog may not have been human domination. It may have been mutual advantage. Wolves got food. Humans got early warning systems, cleanup of food waste, and perhaps even a living alarm at night. The wolves that were least afraid of humans survived better near camps. The most aggressive wolves got killed or stayed away. Over generation after generation, natural selection favored animals with lower fear and lower aggression toward humans. In other words, the first dogs may have domesticated themselves before humans fully understood what was happening. That idea sounds almost too elegant until you look at one of the most famous experiments in modern biology. In the 20th century, Soviet scientist Dmitry Belyaev bred foxes by selecting only those individuals that were least fearful and least aggressive toward humans. He did not select them for floppy ears, curled tails, altered coat colors, or more juvenile faces. He selected only for tameness. And yet, within a surprisingly small number of generations, those physical traits began appearing anyway. The foxes not only behaved differently, they began to look different. Their bodies changed with their temperament. That experiment revealed something profound. When you select an animal for reduced aggression and reduced stress around humans, you often get an entire suite of changes that biologists call domestication syndrome. The skull changes, hormones change, appearance changes, even behavior toward eye contact and social interaction changes. The dog did not become a dog just because humans wanted a nicer wolf. The dog became a dog because the whole biology of fear and development shifted. This is one of the reasons dogs look and behave so differently from wolves. Wolves are extraordinary animals, but they are tuned for a life that does not depend on human partnership. Dogs are tuned differently. They are built not only to survive near us, but to read us, respond to us, and live inside our social world. That transformation did not happen in a moment. It took thousands of years. But the direction of it may have started with something as simple as a nervous wolf discovering that human fire meant food, and a tired human discovering that a wolf in the dark could be more useful nearby than far away. Before we go further, it is worth asking yourself something. If you had lived in that world, cold, hungry, and vulnerable, and you saw glowing eyes just beyond the firelight, would you have chased them away or left a scrap of meat in the dirt? That question is older than civilization. And in some sense, the whole history of the dog depends on how our ancestors answered it. Even if we accept that dogs emerged from wolves through a long process of reduced fear and growing proximity to humans, that still does not explain the most remarkable thing about them. Dogs do not merely live beside humans. They seem to live psychologically with humans. They pay attention to our faces, our gestures, our moods, our routines, our silences. They do not just coexist with us. They tune themselves to us. One of the most beautiful scientific findings about dogs is that when they make prolonged, affectionate eye contact with their owners, oxytocin levels rise in both species. Oxytocin is often called the bonding hormone. It is deeply involved in trust, attachment, maternal care, and emotional closeness. In humans, it is part of what strengthens a bond between parent and child. Dogs trigger that same chemical loop through eye contact, and they experience the rise as well. That means the bond is not one-sided. Your dog is not merely acting attached. Its body is participating in the bond chemically in real time. That matters because wolves, even when raised by humans, generally do not show the same effect in the same way. Somewhere along the path from wolf to dog, something extraordinary happened. Dogs evolved, or were selected, to enter a feedback loop of emotional bonding with us. They became animals capable of using the same kind of relational chemistry that reinforces human social attachment. This is one reason people so often describe dogs in language that sounds almost familial. At a biological level, the bond is not imaginary. Then there is the way dogs understand human communication. If a person points toward an object, a dog usually follows the direction of the point with impressive ease. This seems trivial until you realize how rare it is in the animal world. Even chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, often do not interpret the pointing gesture as naturally as dogs do. Dogs do. Puppies often do it with little or no training. They follow our gaze, read our expressions, and detect shifts in tone that most humans do not even realize they are making. This ability is not simply obedience. It is social intelligence shaped for interspecies communication. Dogs are specialists in reading humans. They can distinguish between angry and friendly voices. They can react differently to a face that appears relaxed versus a face that appears tense. Some experiments even suggest that dogs respond to unfairness. If one dog receives a reward and another does not for doing the same task, the unrewarded dog may stop cooperating and show stress behaviors. That tells us a dog is not just a machine following commands. It is evaluating social context. And then we come to the nose, perhaps the most famous but still most underestimated part of dog biology. Dogs smell the world at a level that is difficult for humans to truly imagine. Their sense of smell is not just stronger than ours. It is almost a different category of perception. They can detect chemical traces in the environment, in bodies, in breath, in sweat, and in the air with a sensitivity that has made them useful in medicine, rescue, policing, border control, and therapy. Trained dogs have been able to detect certain cancers, warn owners before epileptic seizures, identify dangerous drops in blood sugar, and locate missing people in conditions where machines fail. Think about how strange that is. A species that began, perhaps, by following the smell of scraps near a human campfire has become a biological instrument capable of detecting invisible changes inside the human body. Dogs were not shaped by evolution to diagnose human disease in the forest. They became capable of doing that because human life became woven into their own. Our problems became relevant to them. Our scent became meaningful beyond food, fear, and territory. It became information. If you want to know why dogs exist, you cannot stop at domestication. You have to understand this deeper truth. Dogs are one of the only animals on Earth that did not merely adapt to the human environment. They adapted to the human mind, the human body, and the human emotional world. They learn not just where we live, but how we live. So here's a question for you. When your dog stares at you quietly, with no toy, no command, no food in your hand, what do you think it sees? Not with its eyes alone, but with everything it has learned about you. Write that in your own way, because the answer says as much about us as it does about the dog. It would be comforting if the story of dogs were purely beautiful. It would be easy to say that humans and dogs found each other, formed a bond, and together created one of the most touching relationships in nature. That is partly true, but it is not the whole truth. The full history of dogs also includes war, cruelty, exploitation, selective breeding for suffering, and some of the darkest habits of our species. Dogs have been used in warfare for thousands of years. Ancient armies trained them to attack, to guard, to intimidate, and to kill. They were sent into battle not because they understood politics or ideology, but because humans found their strength, loyalty, and trainability useful. In later centuries, dogs were used in colonization, in slave patrols, in prisons, and in brutal systems of violence where obedience was twisted into a weapon. The same species that today comforts trauma patients was once deliberately trained to create trauma. There is something deeply uncomfortable in that fact. Dogs gave us trust, and we repeatedly tested how far that trust could be bent. We discovered that the creature willing to follow us almost anywhere could also be led into our ugliest purposes. That is not a failure of the dog. It is a reflection of us. And then there is breeding. Modern dog breeds are often presented as charming variations on a beloved theme. But the history of purebred dogs is not only about diversity. It is also about human vanity. Once kennel clubs and breed standards became influential, appearance began to matter as much as, or more than function. Some dogs were shaped for exaggerated features that people found appealing, even when those features reduced health and quality of life. Bulldogs struggle to breathe because of compressed skulls. Some shepherd lines suffer from severe hip problems because of the way their bodies were shaped. Certain spaniels are prone to painful neurological conditions because their skulls are too small for their brains. Some tiny breeds have fragile bones, dental crowding, or chronic anxiety linked to the way they were developed. In some cases, we took an animal refined over thousands of years of adaptive partnership and remade it into a body that suffers simply because the suffering looked cute, impressive, or prestigious to us. The dog did not ask for any of this. It cannot consent to breed standards. It cannot protest the narrowing of its gene pool. It cannot refuse being turned into a living ornament. The species that may trust us more deeply than any other has often paid for that trust with its own body. But the story does not end in condemnation, because humans are contradictory. The same species that created harmful breeding systems also created veterinary medicine, rescue shelters, vaccination programs, rehabilitation, welfare laws, and communities of people who dedicate their lives to healing abandoned or abused dogs. Humans can form a breed through fashion and spend a fortune, saving a single injured stray found in a roadside ditch. We are capable of harm and care on a level that makes our relationship with dogs morally complex. That complexity matters because if we want to speak honestly about why dogs exist, we cannot romanticize them into a fairy tale. Dogs exist partly because we needed them, partly because they adapted brilliantly, and partly because once that bond formed, we became responsible for something we still do not always deserve. We inherited not just companionship, but duty. So when people argue about breeding, adoption, or what humans owe dogs, they are not arguing about a minor modern issue. They are arguing about the ethical meaning of one of the oldest alliances in our species' history. If you want, write in the comment what you think. Is buying a purebred dog always wrong, or is the real issue how that breed has been maintained? It is one of those questions where the answer reveals how a person thinks about responsibility, beauty, and loyalty. No animal has entered human culture as deeply as the dog. Not just daily life, but language, myth, religion, storytelling, art, and memory. This alone tells us something important. Dogs were never merely useful. If they had been only useful, they would appear in records as tools. Instead, they appear as symbols, companions, guardians, and mirrors of human values. Across history, human civilizations repeatedly gave dogs roles larger than biology. In Japan, the story of a Chico became world famous because it captured something people desperately want to believe is real: loyalty that survives time, death, and absence. Hachiko returned to a train station day after his owner died, waiting for someone who would never step off the train again. The reason that story moved millions is not simply that a dog waited. It is that the dog seemed to embody a form of faithfulness humans admire and often struggle to achieve themselves. In ancient Egypt, dog-like figures and jackal-headed gods such as Anubis were associated with death, protection, and passage into the afterlife. That choice is revealing. Civilizations do not casually attach sacred meaning to animals, unless those animals already occupy a deep emotional and practical place in life. A dog guarding the threshold between life and death tells us that people saw in these animals something beyond utility. They saw vigilance, recognition, and a strange kind of moral presence. In many cultures, dogs became symbols of guardianship. They guarded homes, flocks, children, roads, thresholds, graves, and mythic boundaries. In others, they symbolize loyalty, humility, watchfulness, or survival. Even in language, dogs appear constantly, though sometimes unfairly. We praise people for being loyal like a dog, but we also insult people by comparing them to dogs. That contradiction itself is interesting. It reveals how close the animal is to us. We use the dog to talk about devotion and degradation, nobility and dependence, love and hunger. Few creatures are loaded with so much emotional meaning. And then there's one of the saddest and most revealing episodes in modern history. Laika, the stray dog taken from the streets of Moscow and sent into space aboard Sputnik 2 in 1957. She became the first living being to orbit Earth. For years, people were told a softer version of her death. Later, the truth emerged. She died within hours from heat and stress. Humanity's first biological step into orbit was made on the body of a dog that had no idea what it was being asked to do. There is something almost unbearable about that fact. When humans reached for the stars, one of the creatures we brought with us first was the same creature that had slept beside our fires for thousands of years. Laika's story is important because it contains the whole contradiction of the dog-human bond. We trusted dogs enough to bring them into our biggest ambitions, and dogs trusted us enough to go. That trust is beautiful, and it is also dangerous when held by a species as morally inconsistent as ours. What all of this suggests is that dogs did not simply become part of human labor. They became part of human meaning. We use them to imagine loyalty, mortality, courage, homecoming, sacrifice, and protection. In a sense, the dog became one of the ways humans think about what it means to be human. That may be the clearest sign that the dog is not just another domesticated species. Sheep changed our economies. Horses changed transport and war. Cattle changed agriculture. But dogs entered our psychology. They entered our myths. They entered our grief. And once an animal enters those things, it is no longer just an animal in the cultural imagination. It becomes part of the structure of human life. One of the reasons dogs are so easy to overlook is that they are woven into ordinary life. Because of that, many of the most astonishing things they do happen in moments so common that we stop noticing them. But if you slow down and examine the small behaviors of a dog, everyday life begins to look very different. Take the head tilt. People often treat it as a cute expression, almost like a trick of personality. But research suggests that when some dogs tilt their heads as a person speaks, they may be trying to process and connect sounds with mental representations. In simpler words, they may be listening with unusual intensity. Try to match human language to remembered objects or situations. The cuteness is real, but behind it may be cognition. The dog is not only reacting, it is trying to understand. Or consider the way a dog sighs and settles its body near you. To us it may look like simple laziness or comfort, but that deep exhale can be a signal of relaxation and safety. The animal is saying, in the only way it can, that in this moment the environment feels secure. When a dog leans against your leg, presses its body into you, or sleeps with part of its body touching yours, it is not always being needy. Physical contact matters to dogs. It can regulate stress, reinforce trust, and strengthen the bond that has existed between our species for thousands of years. Sometimes your dog is not asking for reassurance. Sometimes it is participating in it. Then there is a strained behavior of greeting you with an object in its mouth. A toy, a sock, a slipper, anything it can grab quickly. Many owners laugh at this, but the behavior makes sense if you think about the dog's emotional state. Intense excitement often needs an outlet. Carrying something in the mouth can help channel arousal, reduce jumping or nipping, and express joy through an object. In a way, the dog is so overwhelmed by your return that it has to hold itself together physically. Now think about the walk. Humans often see walks as exercise. Dogs often experience them as information. When a dog stops to sniff a patch of ground for 30 seconds, it is not wasting time. It is reading a chemical map of the neighborhood. Who was here? How long ago? In what state? Moving in what direction? Male or female? Healthy or sick? Calm or stressed? Smell is not background data for a dog. It is the main narrative of the world. A quick walk dragged along a human pace may move the body, but it can deprive the dog of the mental richness it is actually seeking. Even sleep reveals how mentally alive dogs are. Dogs dream. Their sleep cycles include REM stages associated with dreaming, and anyone who has watched a sleeping dog twitch, whimper softly, or move its paws has probably witnessed that inner activity. The likely content of those dreams is not abstract philosophy. It is probably the stuff of dog life. Running, chasing, exploring, interacting, maybe even replaying moments involving the humans they know best. Your dog does not shut off at night. It continues experiencing a private mental life that remains mostly inaccessible to you. This is one of the most important shifts in perspective a person can make. The dog in your house is not a furry habit moving around your furniture. It is a conscious being living in a world rich with scent, memory, anticipation, attachment, stress, desire, and interpretation. That does not mean we should sentimentalize dogs into furry humans. It means we should respect that their inner life is deeper than routine makes it appear. If you want an immediate experiment, do this after reading or hearing this part. Watch your dog for 2 full minutes without interrupting it. Do not call its name. Do not touch it. Just watch. Chances are you will notice something you normally miss, where it keeps checking what it listens for when it relaxes, what triggers its attention, how often it orients to you even when pretending not to. Ordinary behavior is often where the deepest truth hides. A powerful way to understand why something exists is to imagine the world without it, not just emotionally, but historically, biologically, and socially. So what if dogs had never existed? What if those early wolves had stayed in the dark? The first human camps had driven them off, and the long process that created dogs never began. The first obvious difference would have been survival. Early humans were not the fastest predators, not the strongest, and certainly not the best smellers. A cooperative hunting partner with sharper senses, stronger endurance, and nighttime alertness would have offered a major advantage. Dogs helped track prey, retrieve animals, signal danger, and later guard camps and settlements. Without them, many human groups would have hunted less effectively, slept less safely, and expanded more slowly into dangerous environments. The second difference would have been agriculture and livestock management. Once humans began herding animals, dogs became force multipliers. A trained herding dog can do the work of several humans in guiding, containing, and protecting livestock. Guardian dogs can defend flocks from predators in ways that reshape the economics of animal husbandry. Remove dogs from that picture, and many pastoral systems become harder, more labor-intensive, and more vulnerable. Then there are the modern roles. Search and rescue dogs find survivors under snow, rubble, flood debris, and wilderness cover in situations where technology still struggles. Detection dogs identify explosives, narcotics, invasive species, missing persons, and medical conditions. Service dogs guide the blind. Support people with PTSD, assist those with mobility limitations, and alert people before dangerous medical episodes. In hospitals, therapy dogs reduce anxiety and help patients regulate fear. In homes, dogs reduce loneliness in ways that are not sentimental fantasy, but measurable effect. Studies have repeatedly linked dog companionship with lower stress, better cardiovascular outcomes, and improved mental well-being. But beyond all of that lies a less measurable absence, and it may be the most significant. Without dogs, humans would have lost the oldest non-human companionship in our history. There would have been no creature waiting by the door, simply because it wants your return. No species whose affection can survive your bad mood, your failure, your silence, your poverty, your age, or your illness with such minimal judgment. Cats form bonds. Horses form bonds. Many animals do. But the specific form of dog companionship is unusually direct. It is immediate, embodied, and persistent. Imagine human loneliness without dogs. Imagine widowers, children, the isolated elderly, traumatized soldiers, the grieving, the anxious, the depressed, the socially withdrawn, all through history, without that specific presence. It is impossible to quantify exactly what would be missing, but it would be immense. Some people would still survive. Civilizations would still rise. But the emotional climate of human life would be colder. And maybe that is the most surprising answer of all. Dogs do not merely help humans do tasks. They change the felt quality of being alive. They add warmth, alertness, movement, responsibility, rhythm, and attachment to the daily structure of life. A house with a dog does not only have an animal in it, it has a pulse of attention moving through it. So if someone asks what happens without dogs, the answer is not just that we lose helpers. We lose a relationship that has shaped our species from prehistory to the present. We lose one of the oldest bridges between human life and the rest of the animal world. We lose a living reminder that cooperation across species can become something deeper than function. So now we come back to the original question. Why do dogs exist? The scientific answer is that dogs emerged from wolves through a long process of domestication shaped by natural selection, reduced fear, mutual benefit, human influence, and eventually deliberate breeding. That answer is correct. It is necessary, but by itself it feels incomplete because it describes a mechanism without fully capturing the meaning. Dogs exist because one evolutionary pathway led a predator not away from us, but toward us. They exist because some wolves could tolerate our presence, and some humans could tolerate theirs. They exist because survival sometimes rewards proximity more than conflict. They exist because once the relationship began, it created advantages for both sides. We got protection, assistance, warning, company, and sensory abilities we did not possess. They got food, shelter, reproductive success, and eventually entry into strange, crowded, tool-filled social universe of humans. But there's another answer, and it lives somewhere between science and philosophy. Dogs exist because nature occasionally produces a relationship so successful that it starts to feel meaningful beyond utility. The dog is not just a tool that happened to survive. It is a result of tens of thousands of years of shared life. It learned our signals, our schedules, our moods, our homes, our roads, our animals, our dangers, and our griefs. We learn its body language, its warnings, its play, its loyalty, and its silences. Over enough time, that kind of mutual adaptation becomes more than coexistence. It becomes history. That is why the dog affects us so deeply. When a dog looks at human, the moment is not empty. It carries age. It carries firelight, migration, hunting paths, village thresholds, storm nights, battlefields, fields of sheep, hospital corridors, city apartments, and lonely rooms. It carries everything our species has been through with them beside us. In that sense, your dog is never just one dog. It is the latest expression of an ancient agreement. And maybe that is the real truth people feel even if they never say it this way. The dog seems special because it is special, not in a magical sense, but in an evolutionary one so rare it almost feels magical. It is one of the very few animals that cross the distance between species and build a stable emotional civilization with us. The next time your dog waits for you, follows you from room to room, sighs beside you, places its head on your knee, or simply looks at you in silence, remember what you are seeing. You're seeing the oldest friendship in human history, still continuing in your house. You are seeing a creature that could have remained a wolf in the dark, and instead became the animal that learned your face. And perhaps the reason dogs exist is not only that we needed them, perhaps it is also that once life discovered this bond was possible, it kept it. That may be the simplest and deepest answer. Dogs exist because this relationship worked so well that evolution never let it go. If you want, tell me in the comments one thing your dog does that makes you feel it understands you more than words can explain. Those answers are often better than any scientific paper, because they show where biology becomes experience. And that, in the end, is what the dog has always been. Science made personal, history made living, and loyalty made visible.